Okay, the next anchor in our series of the SDI Glossary is the T anchor, and I have one here. This anchor is courtesy of Seco and is representative of what a T anchor would really look like. You can see immediately why we would call it a T anchor. The door and hardware industry is certainly never without shortage of original names. We are a lazy group when we name things, that's for sure. T anchor, that's what this is. T anchors are almost always just like this. Small variations on what a T anchor will look like, and then we'll talk about what it's for. The head of the T anchor is a little bit shorter on the Seco version. I believe that that is by design for probably two reasons. First of all, you'll see that it's dimpled in this area or embossed. That will give this thin gauge of steel more strength, okay, because they've given it this embossment. That's number one. So they're able to cut down on the amount of metal that's used, and then they'll stamp it like this. But also, because it's a thinner head, it's more conducive to the backfilling process of a frame because it doesn't occupy almost all of the interior space of the throat of the frame itself. So that is a difference on this. This T anchor is corrugated. Almost all T anchors are corrugated. Those that are not are generally longer and have a curved lip on the backside, and that, I believe, is so that a complete CMU is a cement block is able to sit on top of it with that curved lip going back around the backside. But almost all T anchors are corrugated like this. I did have a frame manufacturer one time give us those flat non-corrugated T anchors, and my client took them, and he called back. He came back and said, "Don't ever give me those anchors again." I was able to pull it right out of the wall. I don't have any evidence that that actually happened, but that's what the client said, and so that was it. The manufacturer did switch back to a corrugated type. This anchor from Seco, though, has a feature that other T anchors don't, where it has these holes inside of here, and that's obviously for the cement, the mortar, to get through there and to really make a nice positive connection, completely encapsulating this anchor, making the anchor itself covered on all sides completely with mortar, that's for sure. So the Masonry T Shaped anchor, that is the definition we're looking at. SDI says a loose metal device, and I'm reading it, a loose metal device used to secure the frame to new masonry walls. Okay, so it's definitely loose. These are shipped separately. You don't want to forget these with the frame. What's nice about T anchors is you can kind of just strap them with, thin, clear strapping material to the frame. So they transport easily or in a box. I don't like the box idea because the box can get forgotten. The downside of T anchors is that you need a T anchor for every jam depth that you're working on, whether it's your common 4 3/4 through 8 3/4. You need a T anchor for all of those. But it's also if you have custom sizes. Imagine if you were doing jams of 7 1/4 inch, a jam depth. You're going to need an anchor for that size. Now this is a T anchor for a 5 3/4 frame, and the width of that head is 5 1/2 inch. So it's a 1/4 inch short. Its overall length, about 10 inch. Okay. It is a anchor that's made of steel. The thickness of this anchor from Seco is about 57 thousandths of an inch. Steel and a wipe coat galvanized to allow it to have some protection against rusting naturally. So you'll need a specific anchor. If you have 4 3/4 frames and you didn't get any T anchors for it, well, you can use these. You're just going to have to cut these down a half inch on each side. If you had 8 3/4 jams and you had only 5 3/4 T anchors, well, these aren't going to work. You might be able to lay 2 of them on top of each other. We're going to try to get out to 8 1/2 inch. You might take 2 of these and maybe overlap them and weld them together, but you want to make sure that the overall width here isn't thicker than a block itself, which is 7 5/8. So 7 5/8, this is 2 inch. So yeah, you'd be able to lay those together and then have 2 straps. The downside of doing that is that becomes an expensive anchor for you, not only in the doubling up of the material cost, but then the labor to weld them together the point is when you're doing these jam depths, make sure that you're bringing in those anchors, because it's not like a wire anchor where you can stretch that out and use it for any size. So a loose metal device used to secure the frame to new masonry walls. Now, what is a new masonry wall? Well, precast concrete is a new masonry wall, but you wouldn't use a T-anchor for that. What they're talking about really is a wet sort of anchor, wet sort of application where you have a slab and you're going to bring your frame, and frames when it's new masonry construction are always assembled. They're either assembled and welded at your shop, or they're assembled and welded at the job site, or they're just assembled at the job site. It is extremely unusual to send knockdown frames to a job site with T-anchors, because someone's got to assemble that. The mason is not thinking he's doing that. He didn't price his job to set up and to assemble a masonry frame. The problem with it not being welded is you need to get that frame in place. There are a couple of floor anchors that you'll then, with a pneumatic tool, shoot that down to the ground, or however you're going to do it. Tapcons, concrete screws, whatever you're going to use, that has to go down to the ground. And that gets the frame in place. Then what they'll do is they will brace that frame diagonally so that the frame can't move. It won't move this way because it's welded, but it can't move this way. The mason has a lot of responsibility, and they know it. They very much know it. Whether or not they all choose to be mindful of it is a different story. I've had lots of customers call and say, yeah, the mason was here and my doors don't fit. What happened? I don't know. Well, you go out to the job and it's 36 up here and it's 36 down here, but in the middle it's 35 and 13/16. Well, something happened. So they'll brace that frame, and they will then brace it after they're done. But getting to that point, it's braced. The frame must be, the door must be true, plumb, level, and square. The frame is how that occurs. So that frame must be plumb. It must be level. It must be square. It has to be all of these things. If it's not, the door is not going to work right. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Masons that are experts at what they do will get that frame in place. They'll get it secured to the ground. They'll brace it properly so it can't move. They'll bring their wall construction up around it. Then after they're done, they're going to brace that. They'll put 2x4s in the middle. I know one customer who actually takes an entire sheet of plywood and fits it inside of there in the door rabbet so that nothing can move overnight. And I have a client that will, the same client will actually put masking tape over the opening, and he'll say to the customer, hey, if I come back tomorrow and this masking tape is gone, I'm not guaranteeing anything I'm not guaranteeing the door is going to be, swinging correctly. This needs to be left alone and not touched. Super crucial, and not every mason does it that way, but all should be doing it that way. That's the way the textbook says. Now, new masonry walls. In this application with this type of anchor, they're meaning cement, CMU. They're meaning, modular pieces of masonry. Cement block, brick, a combination. So what happens is the frame is down, it's braced. You'll then grout with your trowel. The block goes down in place. Perfect. Grout, trowel over that course. Then you're backfilling into the back of the frame. You're taking mortar and you're getting it inside the throat of the frame. Your next block comes. I would imagine by that time it's time for a T-anchor. That'll get put in the opening between the course, trowel with the mortar. You're backfilling it. That's one advantage of this being smaller. You backfill. A couple more block, another T-anchor. Don't quote me. I don't know how many anchors per block. Yeah, maybe 2 and then 3 and then 2, something in that range. Don't quote me. And that's how a T-anchor is used. And that's what a new masonry wall means in the sense that you're using cement, grout, concrete to lay this between. And these holes will very much allow that mortar to really make this a homogenized unit, and that shorter head will allow that backfilling. Now, speaking of the backfilling, you'll note that on masonry frames, they have mortar guards. They are pieces of steel, pan-shaped pieces of steel that go behind the hardware reinforcements. Obviously hinges, strike preps. The problem is that's generally where that ends, mortar guards. The problem with a mason setting the frame this way is if someone has to come back later and install something like weather stripping or a rim exit device strike or a parallel arm bracket for a closer, and that frame is completely packed with mortar in the jambs and even in the header, depends on the mason. There's probably a lintel that will go there as well. They're probably going to pump that with mortar. Some will. Speaking of pumping, and we're talking about concrete, that same client I said earlier about, mentioned earlier with the masking tape trick, he would have either a grout pump or a grout bag. A grout pump is literally a tool that will allow you through a hose to get masonry into where you want it. And this client would drill a reasonably large hole up in the top of the frame and then just pump the grout in that way when they're doing an existing installation. But the only way they'll do it is when they pump the frame solid with grout. That's the way they like to do it. That's how they do it. And then they'll usually not clean off, but they'll take grout and smooth over that large hole and just leave it. Definitely not a textbook method of doing that. But nonetheless, you get a grout-filled frame. The grout bag is like a baker's bag when you're going to decorate the top of a cake. They literally have those for masonry as well. If you need to get grout into some place, that's the way that would go about being done. But when it comes to mortar guards, someone needs to... The mason isn't thinking about necessarily the trouble that the hardware installer will have. One trick is, and if the mason is actually hanging the hardware as well, a lot of these masons will buy the welded frames, the door, and the hardware package, and they'll do it all themselves, or have someone do that. Those folks will tell you, I need something in the throat of the frame so that when I go to drill my 50 screw holes for weather stripping, I'm not trying to drill into masonry. One trick that we do, and many door hardware distributors do as well, they'll take thin sheets of insulation that you can get from the home center, that they make it in different thicknesses. You can take a strip of that and cut it with an X-Acto blade, even though it will, pieces of it will go everywhere. Get that in the frame and just hold it in with duct tape. Or maybe you can get yourself some spray adhesive that's compatible to both surfaces and hold that in place. And all you're doing is saying, hey, mortar, I don't want you to completely fill this area. The thickness of it should be just what you'd need for the hardware. But to be mindful over that process in a new masonry wall, as it pertains to the T-anchor installation application, very much so, is something that you should also think about. I don't want to mess up the hardware guy giving a soffit packed full of mortar when he's trying to install a parallel arm bracket. So be mindful of that. Mortar guards are very common. If you look at the difference between drywall frames and masonry frames, you will very often find, you'll always find that masonry frames are lacking some details that a drywall frame has. And a drywall frame has things that a masonry frame just doesn't need. The masonry frame needs mortar guards. The drywall frame doesn't need that at all, because nothing's going in the throat of that frame. If you're adding a deadbolt to a frame, weld in a mortar guard. Make sure it's deep enough to take the deadbolt. Or maybe take some 1.5 inches, whatever, at least 1 inch insulation or some sort of a spacer there, and put it in place so that you don't... I've gone to the job site many times and a deadbolt was added and a mortar guard wasn't installed, and that was packed flush with mortar. There was no way, you couldn't even get the strike attached to that sort of application. And conversely, the drywall frame will have compression anchors, and they will most definitely be lacking mortar guards. They won't have that at all. So that's what the T-anchor is used for. Let's switch now to the screen view and just take a closer look at the SDI definition entry for the Masonry T-anchor. If you've not hit subscribe yet, we would very much appreciate if you did, and hopefully you're enjoying this video. Now, let's get back to it. Okay, here's our SDI entry, Masonry T Shaped anchor, a loose metal device used to secure the frame to new masonry walls. So you're literally going to have an application you've got the ground, you have your frame sitting here, it's in place, it's shot down to the floor, then you've got braces running off of it in each direction. That first block is going to come in, you're going to backfill. Right over here. Next masonry unit's going to come in, you're going to backfill. T-anchor. Next masonry unit's going to come in, you're going to backfill. Next masonry unit's going to, well, you're going to mortar. Next masonry unit, backfill. T-anchor. Backfill. T-anchor. Block. Backfill. T-anchor. Whatever. However. But that's the point of how these are installed. You're going to pump all of this or pack all of this with grout. All of it will be packed with grout. That's a new masonry wall construction. When you have precast, obviously the precasting has been done to leave a particular opening where the frame then goes in and you use an existing wall anchor, like what we would call a pipe anchor, but SDI definition is existing wall, something more like this. The next definition is masonry wire. We're going to get to that. Let's wrap up this definition on camera. As I said before, the Masonry T-anchor is the most common anchor, period. New masonry wall construction is you're going to use this. There are some variations on this concept, the wire anchor, the yoke and strap anchor, but they're all the same concept. Something's going between the course of the block as you build the wall. The anchor can easily be attached to the frame with your stretch wrap. You don't want to forget these at all. We like to attach the anchors right to the frame because then there's not a box to forget when you deliver the frames. Thank you to Seco for providing this anchor very much. And our next anchor is going to be the masonry wire, so let's go on to that.
You know what's worse than not having fuel to run your fork truck when you've got 4,000 pounds of doors to unload? It's not participating in the Architectural Builder Supply 10,000 YouTube subscriber March contest giveaway.
Thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up, please subscribe, and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.